The title of my presentation is as follows: Fake Faces and Digital Forgeries on the Uses and Misuses of Symbol and Digital Manipulation. So the interest of this presentation lies on the digital manipulation of face images. So what is the interest of this talk? Within the larger area of the techniques of digital manipulation, my interest lies on the techniques of manipulation, which is called deepfake. Now, deepfake videos are videos in which faces have been swapped using machine learning and deep neural networks, which is why we have the word deep in the construction of deepfakes. So the word deep stands for deep neural networks. Now, the output of this creation is a very realistic simulation of existing videos. There are different types, so a host of varieties of deepfakes with videos, audios, and they are produced for different purposes. The common denominator is that they somewhat mimic an existing content, making the fake look like the real. So deepfake, as you know, was introduced in 2017, and it was quite a jump in the world of digital manipulation. Now, I believe that the blurring of the distinction between authentic and fake videos poses important epistemological questions that semiotics cannot ignore. This presentation is a part of a larger project where I contribute as a postdoctoral researcher. The research is called Facets, which stands for Face Aesthetics in Contemporary E-Technological Societies, and is led by Professor Massimo Leone, which I thank for organizing this panel. There are a few things which I'd like to talk to you today. To start with, one may wonder whether the time we live in marks a new era whereby fakes and forgeries are predominant. Is it really so, and what are the implications of this statement? There is also a corollary to this question, quite important. What sets aside such new forms of digital manipulation as compared to the ones of the past, so to the more traditional forms of fakery? On a more theoretical level, we should probably ask, what has a semiotics of fakes and falsification achieved so far? What can we learn from it? And what are the future challenges ahead? Last but not least, deepfakes and digital manipulation of face images have pivotal ethical, social, and epistemic ramifications which need to be spelled out. Faking is a very complex phenomenon that has exercised a fascination upon the human mind for millennia. Fake, fiction, illusion, manipulation, and deception are topics that are often reported in the media and discussed as academic subjects. Today, such matters are at the forefront of discussion, arousing interest among experts and ordinary people alike. Already in the 1970s, Gray Mass pointed out that the human race has entered into an era in which symbol manipulation became the dominant paradigm. As a result of this, the boundaries, again, between plausibility and veracity, between truth and certitude became blurred. I think that today the paradigm of symbol manipulation has seen a re-emergence through the widespread use of digital media. As Jürgen Rouch spelled out, through digital media, communication, messages, images have been decoupled, so detached from the original sources. And as a result of this, it became quite difficult to assess the truthfulness of the speakers and their credibility. Now, there is a strange paradox going on in the field of semiotics. As it is well known to all the students of this subject, there is a famous definition of semiotics which interlocks the study of science with the possibility of lying by means of the same science. This story has been told so often that I am exonerated from repeating it once more. One would, however, expect that the natural development of semiotics would include the study of the semiosis of deception and that, broadly speaking, phenomena like lies, deceits, masks, simulations, fakes, and all devices of misrepresentations would somewhat appear to be the proper domain of semiotics. In fact, quite the contrary is true, I would say. Despite the fame of Eco's definition, semiotic research on this subject, the subject of falsity, of fakery, of deception, has been scant and has been fragmentary, I would say, with rare exceptions. Now, digital manipulation has a long pedigree, and there are plenty of examples in art history of fakes and forgeries. Image fakery gained momentum with the rise of photography, and today has reached its pinnacle through the use of artificial intelligence and deep learning techniques. The different methods of photo fakery have been brilliantly studied by Dino Brugioni, who is an authority in this field. Brugioni pointed out 4 ways in which a photograph, so a picture, can be altered and can be manipulated. Information can be removed from an image, as it is shown in this example by Brugioni. A second way of manipulating a photograph would be instead by adding information to the photograph itself. The third way would be through photo montage. So you can take 1 or more photographs and you can combine them. The fourth way of manipulating a picture is when you actually have a photograph which is true. So it is a concrete photograph which is being taken, but it purports and it depicts something which is false. This technique is called false captioning in the typology of Brugioni. Now, there is a key distinction which can be drawn from these examples I just shown you, taken by Brugioni's book. There are, I would say, 2 broad categories that can be distinguished here. On one hand, we have falsification, and on the other hand, we have the forgery. Falsification occurs when an object has been altered in some ways or another in order to make it different from what it is. A forgery is somewhat a different story, because a forgery in the strict sense of the word is an object which is in fact manufactured, which is forged entirely to be passed off as what is not. So there is not only one characteristic which is altered, but it is entirely forged. As for example, an object that has been passed off as an antique would be a classical example of forgery in the strict sense of the word. Now, a preliminary question would be then whether deepfake videos would fall into the basket of falsification, in the basket of forgery, or a mix of both categories. Now, I find it quite interesting that this distinction between falsification and forgery fits very well the main structure of deception as was described by Barton Bowyer. Bowyer pointed out 2 main ways in which deception occurs. On one hand, there is dissimulation, and on the other hand, there is simulation. Whilst the purpose of dissimulation is to hide the real, the purpose of simulation is to display the false. Now, both dissimulation and simulation include 3 different techniques of deception, which make in total 6 basic ways of deceiving. Now, for the time being, I'm interested only in 2 of those ways of deceiving because they parallel the 2 main concepts I laid out before, namely falsification and forgery. The categories I am interested in are mimicking and inventing. I will give you a description of what mimicking is. In mimicking, a replica of reality is created by selecting one or more characteristics of the real in order to achieve an advantageous effect. A good example of mimicking is face swap. This is an example of face swap of famous politicians. So face swap is a technique through which the face of famous politician has been changed with the face of another, with a very realistic and uncanny effect. Different is, however, the case of inventing, in fact. In inventing, the false is displayed through the fashioning of an alternative reality, and do not simply through the mimicking of an existing characteristics of the reality. So there would be a difference between mimicking and inventing, in which somewhat it is mirrored, the difference between falsification and forgery. But what happened with deepfakes, we all know. Here is an example, quite famous example.
We're entering an...
Then the question for us would be the following. How do we make sense of such an examples of deepfakes from the perspective of our own field of study, which is semiotic? We owe to Umberto Eco the first formulation of a fully fledged semiotic theory of falsification. Umberto Eco set out a very sophisticated typology of fakes, of which I will lay out only the main categories that can be used for today's topic. So among the many semioticians, I will just focus on Eco's theory, showing his semiotics of falsification. The first type of Eco's semiotics of fakes and falsification is what he terms as doubles. Now, doubles concern the replica, or the replicability of an object, and they do not intend to deceive. So a double is a physical occurrence that has got all the properties of another physical occurrence. Examples of doubles are two eggs or two sheets of paper, which can be used alternatively and interchangeably for the same purpose, which is writing here. The second type, the second head in Eco's typology is what he called pseudo doubles. So there is a pseudo double when one single occurrence takes on a particular value for one of the following reasons. It can take a specific value because of its origin, as for example, the first car, Model T, produced by Ford. An object can also take on a specific value because it was used in a particular context, as for example, the Holy Grail, which was used in the context when Jesus Christ was actually living. But now we come to the most important part of Eco's classification. So now we have reached the third category of falsification, and also the most important point for the purpose of this presentation, which is called false identification. What is false identification in Eco's typology of fakes? So a false identification may occur when there are two different objects, therefore object A and object B, which are produced by two different authors in two different historical contexts. These two objects can be identified as being identical or indiscernible either by one individual or by a group of individuals who decide that these two objects are then identical. This stance leads to a host of different problems. First of all, the issue of intentionality. There are two different levels of intentionalities at stake in this case. First of all, there is the intention of the people who produced the object B, which is made to resemble the object A. Secondly, there is the intention of the people who identified the object B with the object A as being, in fact, identical objects. So if we consider the first case, so if we consider the people who produced object B, we can distinguish then a bona fide intention and a malafide intention. The author B might have produced the object B maliciously to pass off something fake for real, but he might also have acted in good faith. So we have two different cases. However, much more complex is the situation of the intention of those who have decided that object A and object B are identical. So a consideration of the subject's knowledge and beliefs adds up a level of complexity to this example, to this problem. According to the type of belief and the knowledge of the individual or the group who have identified object A and object B as being identical, ECHOS singles out 4 different cases of false identification. The first case is what ECHO calls a confusion between identity and interchangeability. So someone knows very well that the object A cannot be identified with the object B, which was produced afterwards by imitation, but believes that the two objects are interchangeable in value and in function, and uses and presents one as identical to the other. The second case is different and is called malicious false identification. In this case, someone knows that the object B is just an imitation of object A and cannot be identified with it, nor does he believe that the two objects are interchangeable. But in bad faith, he pretends and says that object B is identical to object A. The third case, identified by ECHO, is a false identification of two different objects, which is made simply because the individual or the group of individuals who assess these objects are just inexperienced or they lack knowledge. In this case, the person or the individual ignore that the two objects are not identical and believe they are the same object. There is then a fourth type in this typology of falsification, which is called the presumption of interchangeability. In this case, someone knows very well that object A and object B are different physical objects, but decides that under a certain description and for the purpose of a certain practice, one is as good as the other and is presented not as identical, but as completely interchangeable. I will now try to draw some distinctions and some conclusions for what concerns the implications of deepfakes. First of all, what are the implications then that can be drawn from this discussion of deepfakes, also in the light of the typology of falsification laid out by Umberto Eco? We should ask whether the future lying ahead to us is a sort of dystopic scenario where fakery becomes harder and harder to assess. So seeing would be not anymore believing. So one question for us would be to lay out some sort of critical skills that people need to operate in this scenario. If you take, for example, case 3 of people who lack knowledge and experience in assessing two objects, then it is obvious that some critical skills and technical skills are needed as well. If fakes and authentic are basically indistinguishable to the average internet users, there must be then other criteria, perhaps the content, perhaps the context, perhaps the historical records of the speaker, and so forth, in order to establish whether something we see is authentic, real, or not. Perhaps in the future there will be a system of authentication by the author himself, but this remains certainly an open and unresolved problem. The most important implication from the semiotic point of view is that the two different levels of analysis are often mixed up one with another. In a nutshell, the aspects of convincingness, of truth, and of denotation of signs might be a speech, might be a visual sign, or maybe a video, are not the same, although they are often mixed up. The result of this mixing levels of analysis together is simply adding up confusion to an aspect which is, in my opinion, already complex in and of itself. Being convincing does not equal to being truthful nor to being reliable. So from the semiotic point of view, deepfakes, as well as any type of misinformation, capitalizes on the mixing up of two aspects of the uses of science. Now there is a second point which I'd like to draw. Whilst in the past, fakes and forgeries were about falsifying objects of arts, so art objects and artifacts, today's target of digital manipulation is the essence of the individual, the human face, the speech of the individual and his actions. So what is considered to be the core of the identity of the individual, his own face, is being faked. If the quantity of images circulating on the web is directly proportional to the possibility of being the target of a deepfake, then almost anyone can be an object of deepfakes, not only celebrities and politicians. So in the case of a malicious false identification, this has considerable implications on the privacy and ethics, especially when there is no consent from the people involved. There is then a third conclusion, a third point, which I'd like briefly to mention. If we think of art history, we have a situation in which one single valuable item, conceived as an unicum, is the object of falsification by many skilled forgers. This means that one authentic object generates a host of fakes and copies that seek to mimic or to pretend to be like the original. Today, with the emergence of deepfake, it seems that the model of faking follows a reverse logic, in my opinion. There is not anymore a one-to-one replica, but a model of many-to-one. The production of deepfakes, in fact, entails the extraction of images of faces through deep learning. This process requires a very large amount of data. In other words, in order to create one deepfake video, you would need thousands, hundreds, and thousands of face pictures. This model of producing fakes is somewhat a reverse of the model in the past. I thank you for your attention, and I welcome questions by the audience. Thanks a lot.